This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, great. So let me now go ahead and are you able to see my screen? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Kiran,
Yes.
I think Kiran.
Sorry. Yeah, she can go ahead, please.
Yeah, yeah. Can you, before closing this sessions, can you do one favor like the complete project? Can you, from beginning to end, can you do
So
that one?
that's what I'm telling you. I will tell you what to do. I expect you all to do the complete project, and we can
Okay.
discuss upon that. Okay. So I'll tell you what exactly needs to be done, and I want you all to do it. Because right now we are like we have a good amount of maturity on what exactly the project needs to be looking like we have discussed everything individually, and we now need to connect the dots. So that is something that I'll ask you all, or I'll tell you all basically what to do, and accordingly let's try doing it. Okay,
Yeah, sure.
is that okay, guys?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, Kiran.
Okay, so let me go into my repository out here, like my class repository, and we said we had a docker and we had a simple docker file, right? Like we had a simple docker file out here, which was let's going ahead and building you the image and all that stuff. But let's take a step back and let's see what we have done to kind of build this image. So what we did is like we created a project in in Visual Studio. So we had a project here, the .NET Core application, and what we did in this project is that we said, okay, fine, let's go ahead, let's do a .NET publish. So we did a .NET publish. So we used a .NET command to publish it, and what we published is we actually published the executable DLL. So let me open up a notepad, that's better to explain. So we had a .NET project, we created a .NET Core project, firstly. Secondly, we did a .NET publish in order to publish the DLL and all that stuff. So we published what at the end of the day? We said we had a DLL, some XYZ app.dll, which is our actual executable. After the DLL what published, we wrote a very simple Docker file. Wrote a Docker file, placed it inside the publish folder. We copied or we did an FTP into the machine, into let's say the Linux machine, and we said Docker image build target is some Docker application, and we set a dot, which went ahead and built the entire image for us, right? So this is what we did, and then we said the image is built, and then we did what? We wanted to store our image, so we used something known as an ACR, and we did a Docker image push, or firstly Docker image tag and then Docker image push into the Azure Container Registry. From that, we use something known as a Kubernetes manifest file, like something like this, something called as an app.yaml and a services.yaml file, like an application.yaml and a service.yaml file, in order to basically create our Kubernetes cluster, and then into our Kubernetes cluster orchestrate our containers. This is what we've been doing till now. But right now what I want to do is that I want to use Azure DevOps. I Whenever now the developer kind of uses his laptop and kind of checks in, right, the code is in a raw format, guys, right? Until now we said the code is in a raw format only. We don't expect the developer to build the code because that's a manual procedure, and we wanted to use a build pipeline for it. In order to do what? In order to produce the artifact, the .zip files, the binaries, and whatever it is. And using this .zip file, we said take it to a release pipeline and then deploy it onto, let's say, our target application like a web app or an IIS server, whatever it is. Now this process I wanted to slightly change. What I want to do right now is that I don't want to produce a .zip file. Rather, whenever the developer checks in his code, whenever the developer does what? A code check-in, I want my pipeline to take the code, build the code, and convert the entire code into an image. Take this image out, push it into what? The Azure Container Registry, ACR, into the Azure Container Registry. After it's pushed to the Azure Container Registry, I want to do a Kubernetes deployment using what? The app.yaml and the service.yaml file that I have. I want to basically go ahead and do a Kubernetes deployment out here. Firstly, let me divide this into build and release process. So it's a build process where I'm doing all these things. I'm pushing my files and all that stuff. And this is a release process which uses two different files, which is app.yaml and services.yaml. So let's say this is release. Let's focus upon our build pipeline. So what all do I need right now to build this out? Normally, when we go and build a .NET application, guys, what we do? We use the .NET template to basically restore, publish, build, and give the artifact out. But here I'm telling that I don't want the artifact. I don't want a .zip file out here. I want to build, get it converted into an image, and then push it into the Azure Container Registry. We were doing it from our local machine, right? But that is not suggestible when we know a technology like Azure DevOps. So what I'm going to do is, like, let's say I'm going to create an application from the scratch. Let's say Visual Studio. Let's open this application. And let's say create a new project. And I want an ASP.NET Core application out here. So let's give it a second so that it'll load everything. Okay, so I'm just loading this particular template, and I'll say next. I'll just say this is docker.net application or something like this, apply. Just say next. I'll say create. I'm creating it in a .NET 3.1 out here, and I'm saying create out here. Okay. So again, just a recap, this is a raw code, right? What we have to do with the raw code, we'll firstly have to build the raw code. We'll have to convert it into something known as a machine understandable language, into DLLs, and then target that particular DLL and create an image out of it, right? And expose something like a port 80. This is what we've been doing, exposing the ports and all that stuff. Now I want to play around a little different. I now will say that I don't even want to build the particular code using something called as a .NET build, meaning I don't want to use that particular task. Rather, since I am dockerizing my entire application, firstly let's go ahead and let's say let's do pages, and let's edit out the index.html page, and let's say docker and something like this. Let's say docker. Let's say welcome to containerization, something like this, a sample edit. Welcome to containerization. And let's say save this out. Now I want to write a Docker file. And what does Docker file really have? It has images, it has instructions, right? It has instructions on how to build, where to build, what all to do, and all that stuff. Now I also want to pass in instructions into my Docker file, telling it to do a build of my program, meaning build of my code, convert my code into an image, and expose the port out. This is all the things that I want to pass on to my Docker file. What I'll do is very simple. This is even more easier. Just come down to your solution, or just come down to your project file out here. Do a right click, say add Docker support. Like this is something that the developer will do, so you don't have to worry about it. And I'm selecting in the operating system called a Linux. And what it's going to do, guys, is that it's going to create a Docker file for me. It's going to create what, a Docker file for me. And I just want to expose the port called 80. So this is the only thing that I want to expose. And let's come down to my Docker file once again and just save this out. This is the only thing that I'll do. That's it. I won't do anything. And my Docker file right now is a full-fledged Docker file, which is telling that, you know what, from this particular base image, please copy everything into the working directory, export port 80, and then do a .NET restore, then do a .NET build, then publish the application into an app.publish folder, and finally create an image out of it with an entry point called Docker. I mean, there's an entry point called your application.dll. I did not even do anything. I used the Visual Studio, inbuilt Visual Studio, and just created a file called a Docker file out here, right? Created a Docker file. Now all I'll be doing right now is that let me go ahead and create a new repository out here into my particular project, like test sample project or something like this. Let's create a new repository out here, and let's call this repository as Docker application. Say create, clone this repository out here in VS Code. Say open in VS Code. Say open, and I'll say okay, fine. Let me go ahead and clone the entire thing into one repository out here called Docker repo and something like that. So this is like doing a clone operation right now, and I'll say open, and this will basically open the entire application and just as a readme file out here. Now what I'm going to do is, like, I'll say go into the path where the application is actually published. So I'll say open the path in the file explorer, so that I'll get whatever it is. I'll just take the entire repository, the Docker application, copy it, paste it into my new volume, and that was called what, Docker repo or something like that. Let's say what did I paste it as, Docker application. This is what it is, and I'll just paste it out here into this particular repo. I am just pasting out here. That's it. All I'm doing is just pasting my entire code, and now the code also consists of a Docker file that I built using a Visual Studio. This is the important entity that I'm looking at. Now if you look at the VS Code, they'll have a couple of changes and all that stuff. So I'll basically say stage all these changes. Say stage changes, I'll say pushing code along with Docker file. I'll say commit. I'll just sing the changes. Say okay, I want to sing these changes out, and I'll send all these changes back into my branch. So when these changes are saying, then kind of are in my branch right now. So it's in my branch. I'll go and I'll say new pipeline. Say classic editor. I'll say okay, fine, this is the main branch, and I now want to say Docker. It says Docker container, build a Docker image and push it to an Azure container registry. This is the only thing I want. I am not even using a .NET build and all that stuff. Just two very simple steps. Firstly, we'll build an image. So I'll use an Ubuntu server here, like Ubuntu basically, or a Linux server. Any server is like okay with me here, frankly. So it just wants to what, build an image, and also is asking you where is your container registry. So let me go ahead and give, let's say, the service principal out here, and I do not have a container registry as such. So what I'm going to do is I'll just basically come here into a resource group, create a container registry, This again can be achieved using automation. You can have ARM templates here in order to create a container registry and basically put that container registry in place. But for now, since we are just doing a trial, let's say test RG, and I'll basically go ahead and create a container registry out here. I say container registry, sorry, let's say container registries. It's a new container registry out here. Say test RG, registry name is test reg or something like this. Registry 210 or 10 something like this. Some random name that I'm giving so that it is unique. This is done. I'll say ECS2. I'll say this is queue is like basics queue. Networking, all these things are okay. I'll review and create it out. Now once I create it, I'll enable the access policy on, I'll enable the access here so that the images can be pushed into it. So I'm just creating a container in place, but having said that, you can also use PowerShell or ARM templates in order to create it and put it in place. If you want a complete automation, like normally the container creations, the container registry creation is a one-time setup. So we just go ahead and do it on the portal because it doesn't really harm. So it's just a one-time setup out here. So I'll just go to resource. I'll say access keys and I'll just enable the access key out here so that the images can be pushed. And as of now, there are no images, nothing. There's like nothing out here. Sorry, there are no images, there are nothing out here, no repositories and anything. So what I'm going to do is I'll say, okay, fine, let's go into the pipeline right now. Let's do refresh a couple of times. And now I'll select the registry and I'll say, okay, fine, build an image. This is not tag, this is not push, this is build an image. And I'll say the Docker file is this particular entity. It's here. Select the Docker file. This is the Docker file that I want to basically use, and I'll say use the default context and all that stuff. It now says the image name will come something like this: build.repository name and then build ID and all that stuff. I'll say, just to make sure this is simple and straightforward, I'll say Docker application tag is latest with the latest tag, and I'll say great, this is what the tag is. This is the only thing that I need. This is how you build my image. Secondly, push the image. I want you to push inside the container registry that we have just created. Image name, again same thing, whatever was the image name that I declared here. I'll just basically declare the image name out here. That's it. Docker application colon latest. Those are the only two changes that I need. And I'll say save and queue. So all we are doing right now is pushing the image. I'm not even publishing an artifact. Now see, I'm not even publishing an artifact out here. All I am doing is using this particular sample project out here, like this particular pipeline out here called Docker CI, and I am just building the image. How am I building the image? I am building the image by having something known something known as a Docker file in place. If you see here, it's now doing multiple steps that I have mentioned in my Docker file. Whatever that I mentioned in the Docker file, it's just going ahead and doing it. Yes, it failed. Let's see why it failed. Okay, so it says, okay, fine, copy file found, but built. Okay, that particular CS project does not exist. Okay, no stat, that particular CS project does not exist. Let's see. Docker application and then Docker application.cs proj. This particular file, let's see this. Let's see what is the CS project basically that it's asking me for. This is the entire path basically it has. So it has Docker application and all that stuff. So that's the reason it kind of failed. So yes, this is an issue basically when you're not doing it on Azure DevOps. Basically, you have another folder that got added here. That's the reason this path basically kind of a bit missed out. So this is the place where it kind of failed. It says this is the restoration where it kind of failed. So I'll say okay, fine. I'll say restore. I'll say copy entirely to Docker application. Let's see, do Control Z. So it has Docker application and something like this. So let's do a copy out here. So I want to make sure to copy that particular CS project file into Docker application. Then I want to build this particular Docker. Then I want to build this particular CS project file. Then I want to copy this particular file. It says source, something like this. So it says source and then application working directory, which is the particular working directory out here. And it's good now. So I'll just basically see this out and I'll just try to build this pipeline again. So it's just something to do with the path. So that's something, I mean, even if it fails now, I wouldn't be, really surprised, because the path what you're passing is a bit different from what you're mentioning in your Docker file out here. So all that corrections needs to be done. And once that corrections are done, you can go ahead and build the image and all that stuff. So guys, are you all getting what I'm trying to do out here? Any questions still here, guys? Anything, guys? Anything?
Can you show how you right click that file for creating Docker file in the Visual Studio?
So all I did is like, came here, right click this out in this one, and I said add, and I said a Docker support.
Okay.
I said just a Docker support out here. Did you get that, Sanjay?
Yes, I got it.
Okay. So I just did a Docker support as such. I just opened up that particular Docker support as such. That's it. And it just went ahead and kind of gave that file. It created that particular file out here. Let's see our build pipeline right now. Let's see how it is like working on. Still waiting for the agent to get acquired from the cloud. This will take time because we are using our Azure hosted agent, right? Hosted agent instead of a self-hosted agent. So it will take some time in order to get the agent and all that stuff. But normally how a pipeline run looks like. So I already have a pipeline that kind of ran. Let me open that while this pipeline is getting built, not this one. Let me go to the Terraform project. Let me say pipelines. This is much more clear example on how basically that I build this out. So very simple. I had the same setup. I had the same repository and all that stuff. It went ahead, just built the image, did whatever I said it to do in the Docker file. So it said, okay, fine, from this one, I have like 14 commands to execute. It went ahead, same Docker file, even the Docker file is same. Application name is a bit different. Docker file is literally the same thing. I just made sure to, kind of, expose this port out and all that stuff. So same application, everything is the same. Docker file is also the same. I did not even expose the port out here. It did it automatically. So not a problem. So once you have a Docker file in place, all you need is your pipeline. That's it. All you need is your build pipeline, which has two simple definitions. One, where is your Docker file? Second, where is your registry? Once you have these two informations, you can do a push of the image and all that stuff. That's the only thing that I'm doing. So let's go to our later project. Let's see if that kind of got triggered. Yeah, it again failed. Let's see why it failed. Okay, still says the project does not exist. Let's see this. Says okay, fine, copy file failed. It could not find context out there. Excluded by dot gate ignore. Okay, file does not exist. Okay, some issue with the code basically that we are trying to do. So I'll fix this out. I'll see know why exactly this is failing out. But to avoid basically wasting time out here, let's take the existing application. So the same application, everything is the same. I am making sure that I have a Docker file in place, the same Docker file that I just built out. All I'll do is like I'll basically open up this pipeline. So this is how the pipeline that we are building looks like. So you don't have these two steps, so I'll just disable them for now. We'll talk about what they're doing right now. This is save in queue. That the error what we're getting might also be an issue with the agent and all that stuff. So I'll have to still see why it's like kind of failing, and why basically the get ignore file is coming in place. So I'll look into that. And I'll kind of give an update on this one. I'll just need to kind of see what exactly the error is and what the logs are actually saying, and actually run the pipeline once in, let's say, debug mode and etc. But this pipeline is also it might also kind of fail because I have not given the container registry. So let's see. So this is going to build the image. So all the commands that I'm actually giving in the Docker file, like the .NET restore, the copy, all that stuff, everything, I just took it and I'm just putting it out here. That's it. I'm just giving this particular the Docker file out here, and I'm telling the Docker file to go ahead and kind of build my image out. Once it's building the image, the second step is it'll go ahead and kind of push the image out there. So building the image, pushing the image failed because I know why it failed, because I haven't given, let's say, the the proper part of the container registry. So this is something that we haven't fixed, because this was a before pipeline that I was using, and the Azure container registry that I was using out there kind of got deleted. So let's use this, and let's use this particular registry that's there. Same thing, I'll do this for this one. I'll say okay, and I basically take a registry. That's it. So this was a simple fix that I had to do. And once save in queue, it's using the Docker file, building it out, pushing it into the Azure container registry. The pipeline is just doing that. That's it. This pipeline is just doing my building and my pushing into the Azure container registry. Once this is done, I will be able to see the image in my Azure container registry. Now this is something that we were doing manually, right? We had a virtual machine. We took that virtual machine, then we built the image, and then we pushed the image by using the Docker push command, into the Azure container registry and all that stuff. Now I am proposing we do it using Azure DevOps, which is much more easier way to do. Like building and creating of the images is simplified using the Docker file. So all you need to do is not all the commands. You just need to have one simple Docker file in place. Take that Docker file, push it out. That's it. Now it says, okay, fine, it's pushing the image because right now I have given the Azure container registry out here, the right part to the Azure container registry. And now it says, okay, post job, I'm like, doing this one out. Now, if you look at this, it is not published an artifact because I did not want it to publish an artifact. I wanted to push the image into the Azure container registry out here. And if I look into the repositories right now, you have a Docker application that got created, meaning an image for Docker application that got created. Also, what I'll do is I'll just paste this entire Docker file for you all for your reference, because that's a working Docker file, right? It will be a good reference for you all. So I'll just take the entire Docker file, that what I am using for my reference as such, and I'll just paste it out here in the repository that you guys are referring to. So I'll just say go into this repository. Since this is a public repository, right? You all can sorry, easily refer this out to. I'll say Docker file fill. I'll just paste it out here so that you can take this and kind of refer this out to. But do you all have a question with this particular pipeline, guys? Anything with this particular pipeline? Anything till here? Like Is this understandable? Is this okay on what we are trying to achieve? Any questions, guys? You guys able to follow?
Yes.
Okay, so I have the image right now. I want to now take this image and basically deploy it on top of a Kubernetes cluster. So I will need a Kubernetes cluster to exist in the first place, right? You can create it. Can you create it using ARM templates? Very well possible, very well recommended. But right now, for now, I'll just go ahead and create this out manually. So I'll say Kubernetes. I say create a Kubernetes cluster, and it asks me for all the information, and I'll basically choose a very basic standard like a dev test application out here. Say apply, and I'll say cluster name is sample cluster, and the cluster is an ES2, and it says availability zone. I don't need any availability zone out here. I also want to kind of downsize my workload to, let's say, a reduced one, like something like B2S, which is good enough for me. And it's a single node cluster, meaning I'll only have one virtual machine here. And I don't want auto scale. I just need a manual scale out here. Node pools. All this is like just one particular node pool, which is running, let's say, on a standard B2S. So this is a virtual machine, basically what it's trying to tell. Then authentication, I'll say system assigned authentication. I basically go to the integration and I'll say integrate it with the Azure Container Registry that I have in place. Say next, tags, review, and create. So I'm creating a very simple cluster out here. This is called a Kubernetes cluster, and it's going ahead and kind of creating this cluster with a one node cluster. Like it's just a one node, very simple virtual machine that is running in the backend. I'll just say create this out. Now, in order to make deployments on this cluster, what will I need, guys? Now, what should I need in order to make deployments on this cluster? What did we talk about? Anyone?
A node.
Okay, I have a node. I'm creating a node right now. Like I have the cluster with me. I have everything with me. Now, if I want to deploy a container on top of that cluster, what will I need?
We need pods.
Yes, we need pods. So how do you deploy pods?
We can create the new pods.
Correct. So how do you create a new pod? Like you use something called as a YAML file, right?
Yeah.
App.yaml and services.yaml. This is something that we were talking about, isn't it? So we had app.yaml and services.yaml, and this is the file. What I would say is that it will go into your repository, pull the image, and then create a runnable instance of your image, which is a container or a pod in terms of Kubernetes. We copied this file and we said, okay, fine, go ahead and create that particular cluster for me. This is something that we did, right? Now I want to use Azure Devops in order to do the same thing. I want to use Azure Devops in order to go ahead and provision the pods for me. How do I do it? Now, if I come down to my repository, like in my case, I have the Kubernetes manifest with me. It says go to this particular test container registry, take out this particular application. In my case, the container registry, the name got changed. So I am saying, okay, fine, I'll take the fully qualified domain name, which is like this one. Go into my app.yaml file. Sorry, not this. Go into my app.yaml file and just change this piece of information. That's it. It is a Docker application. The image has a name called Docker application, the same thing that I created. So I'll just leave the name as that. And the tag is latest. So latest tag, Docker application. Same thing I'll be using here. Docker application latest tag, and I'll say commit. I have a app.yaml file. which is deploying the pod for me. I have a services.yaml file which is giving me a load balancing solution so that my application is exposed to the outside world. So when we had the Kubernetes cluster with us, what we did is we went into that particular Kubernetes cluster, went into workloads, said add a workload, and said add the workload in the form of a YAML file, pasted that YAML file out there, and created a pod. A pod nothing but is a container running on your node in Kubernetes. Now, can I do the same thing with, let's say, this particular pipeline? Meaning, can I basically take this YAML files from this particular pipeline and deploy it upon the Kubernetes cluster that I'm about to create? Yes, definitely. For that, what do you need to do in your pipeline is your build pipeline should produce an artifact. Your build pipeline should just produce the artifact which has app.yaml and services.yaml file. That's it. These are the two things that I need, for which I won't build anything. I'll simply do a copy operation. This is what I did here in the step number 3. I said copy. Source folder was kube manifest. That is the folder there basically that I had. Like if you look at the folder structure, this is the kube manifest, and inside that kube manifest, whatever files are with an extension called .yml, go ahead and paste them or post them, copy them to, let's say, something known as a build.artifact staging directory. Finally publish the artifact. I'll just save in queue, save and run. So what I'm doing my build pipeline right now is that I'm now basically telling my build pipeline to go ahead and please deploy it out here. That's it. I'm going ahead and telling build the image, you're building it, push the image, you're pushing it. Now also go ahead and copy the YAML files and place it in the artifact staging directory so that I can use it in my what? I can use it in my release pipeline. And my release pipeline will contain very simple tasks called deploy to Kubernetes. That's it. Instead of doing an Azure Web App deploy, I am doing a deploy to Kubernetes right now. And I'll deploy two things. One is the app.yaml file. Second is the services.yaml file, because this cluster needs only that, right? What did we do here in the cluster? We came here, we came into the workload, we added the workloads, right? So we went ahead and we said add a workload, add a YAML file, and I just added a workload out here in the form of a YAML. And then I came into services, I added a service in the form of, let's say, a YAML, a load balancing service. Two very simple things that I did out here. Same thing what I'll do is once the build pipeline is done, let's see where my build pipeline is. Sorry, yes, the build pipeline is done. And the build pipeline right now is giving me an artifact. The artifact right now has app.yaml, services.yaml. And now I'll come down to the release pipeline. I'll say new release pipeline. I'll say empty job. Let's start with an empty job. And I'll say Kubernetes deployment pipeline. I'll say add an artifact, and I'll just choose the build pipeline that was there here. I'll say okay, fine. This is a Docker image push. This is the pipeline that I've been using. I'll say add this pipeline out. I'll just call the stage name as dev or test or something like this, just a testing stage. Here I'll say add, and I'll say Kubernetes. Just type in Kubernetes, and you should find a couple of tasks out here that will tell you Kubernetes deploy and all that stuff. Let's say Kubernetes, and let's say it says deploy to Kubernetes, right? I'll say add this file. I'll say deploy application. It's now asking me for a Kubernetes service connection, guys. You cannot use the existing service connection that you have. You need a Kubernetes service connection. In my case, I have a Kubernetes service connection. I have a Kubernetes service connection called my sample connection and all that stuff. If you want to create a Kubernetes service connection, just say create. It says it's loading the Azure subscriptions and all that stuff. It'll just ask you to authenticate. That's it. It'll create. That's it. It'll create your own Kubernetes service connection. You don't have to do a lot of things out here. So I'm saying add a Kubernetes service connection, and it says, okay, fine, this is the Kubernetes service connection and all that stuff. But in my case, I already have a service connection, right? So I'll just take this out and I'll say the namespace. It's asking me for something known as a namespace. I'll say it is default. And now say, okay, fine, the manifest. I'll say browse for manifest out here. Okay, why is it not browsing? Let's give it a refresh. I know it won't be saved. There's some issue with the pipeline. Let's see, come down, releases. Let's see new release pipeline again. And let me basically go ahead and take the service connection out so that I can create a new one so that it will help you all out also. Let's say delete. And let's say, okay, fine, great. Let's say add an artifact. And I'll say my build pipeline, I'll select my source build pipeline, which is Docker image. Say add this out. Empty job. I'll say this is Kubernetes deployment. Stage name is a test stage out here. I'll say kube. Says deploy to Kubernetes. Now let me check if there is a manifest that is getting reflected out here. Yeah. So there is sometimes a bit of bug out here. So you just have to kind of click it twice and etc. And I want an apps.yaml, the application.yaml file basically getting deployed. As I deploy application, I'll say there is no service connection that for me right now. So I'll just go ahead and create a new service connection. I'll say Azure subscription, and it'll just ask me what is the subscription. And it's saying, okay, fine, this is the please go ahead and enter your credentials out here. I'll say @outlook.com. I'll just ask me to authenticate my account. So I'll just go ahead and do that. So allow me a second so that I can do that out here. And Kubernetes is going to go ahead and kind of create its own service connection out here. And I'll say this is the cluster, sample cluster, which I have right now, which is under test RG. So let's see what's the cluster name is sample cluster. It's under the test RG, and it says what are the namespaces that you have. I'll select the default namespace, and I'll say this is sample cluster connection. I'll say grant access to all the pipelines. I'll just save. So I'm creating a service connection only for one particular cluster out there, okay? And now it says namespace. I'll say default. And now it says, okay, fine, this is the app.yaml file that you want to deploy. Great. I'll clone this task. I'll say deploy service load balancer. I'll say LB load balancer. It's just deploy same thing, but now the YAML file is going to be a bit different. It's not app.yaml, it's services.yaml that I'll target. I'll just save. I'll just say run. So I'm using the app.yaml and the services.yaml file. Instead of now doing a manual deployment approach, right now, I am going ahead and deploying this out onto the Kubernetes cluster using an Azure Devops release pipeline. Now what this is going to do is that it's just going to pick up the app.yaml and let's say the services.yaml and deploy it on top of the cluster using the service connection that we have just created. So it is just going to do that. That's it. Just going in the backend, it will use the Kubernetes commands and push all the app.yaml files and the services.yaml files on top of the cluster. This is what it's attempting to do right now. So it says, okay, fine, default namespace is this. Now I'll go ahead and do what? A kubectl.exe. If you see this out, it's telling I'm using a tool called kubectl in the backend, and I'm basically going ahead and deploying the app.yaml and the services.yaml file on top of it. That's it. So it deployed the application. Now it's doing a load balancing service, and it's waiting for an external IP to be assigned out here. So once you have the IP, you can also kind of see the IP on what it kind of got assigned. So I am just doing two services, app.yaml and the services.yaml. And right now I am making sure that I go to the route of an Azure DevOps release pipeline. And now it also kind of gave an external IP to it. So if you come down out here, it says this is the external IP. This is how the service kind of looks like. Now if you go to your Kubernetes cluster, if you go to services and ingress, you have a service created. And if you go to the workload, you'll also see the workload called app deployment which got created about a minute ago using our release pipeline. Now if I can go ahead and kind of click on this, I have the version 1 of my Docker application coming into picture. This is what I have put it in my code. Now you can do a CI/CD out here. Whenever a developer does some change to the code, you have a new image or a new version of an image getting built. That image will be referred to your app. That image will be basically referred to the application.yaml file and the services.yaml file deployed onto your Kubernetes cluster, and then now you will have a new application running, and this application now is running from a container hosted from a Kubernetes cluster out here, and you are managing the entire lifecycle using the Azure DevOps out here. This is how we make sure to use Azure DevOps in order to make sure to balance the entire lifecycle. This is the complete picture on how do you do it using Azure DevOps. Now, please tell me, guys, is this easy or is going ahead and doing manually easy? Anyone, guys, any issues with this? Guys, anything? Any questions? Any concerns? Anything, guys? Anything? Are you all able to follow? Where you are able to follow this out?
In real time, we will do by pipelines, or we will create by manually.
Pipelines only. Like you're not going to touch manually, but you need to understand how it's achieved manually in order to automate it using the pipeline. So you're only going to use pipelines out there. In the real time, that's how it's actually going to work. So this ends the entire course curriculum, guys. Like whatever was the theory, whatever was the practical, now comes the real part. It's like how do we prepare for interviews and all that stuff, right? So what we'll do is like we'll basically take weekends. So the next weekend is 30th, so we have like about 7 days in between to prepare things out. So what I want out here, 5 minutes, sorry, what I want out here is that what are the topics that we are going to cover in the mock, and who will volunteer for this. These are the two things that I need. Okay, now the topics are Azure tenant, Azure subscription, Azure resource groups, and RBACs as your storage accounts. If I say storage accounts, all the subtopics inside the storage accounts like file services, file shares, and then containers, lifecycle management, all these things, and ARM templates or PowerShell scripts on the same thing. And Azure Devops, I'll ask repos, I'll ask branches, policies, and strategies. This is what I'm going to ask. And who can volunteer for this? Like for the first thing, who can volunteer?
Myself, Sanjay.
Okay, so Sanjay is going to volunteer for this particular interview. So Sanjay, I have your resume. I'll just go through your resume and ask the question accordingly. So it's going to be around 15 to 20 minutes of interview, and then we'll discuss on what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, what is the process of driving the interview, and etc. And these are going to be the topics for the interview. Okay.
Okay. And you told some sample recording you will share that that also can you able to
Yes,
share?
I will. Yeah, I'll I'll have to just look at where the recording is. I'm not really sure in which drive that I saved. So just give me like one day. I also have an office today also. So just give me like a day. I'll look into that and kind of share the recordings also for you. Okay.
Okay. Okay. This will be on next Saturday or when it will be?
The coming Saturday, 30th.
Okay. Okay. Then
30th again on. I'll just let you all know the timing. Like I'm not really sure about the timing at this point, but I'll let you all know the timing by Monday or latest by Tuesday. Okay.
sure.
Now this is the interview questions that I want to prepare. Secondly, now I have a requirement for a project. Now the requirement is something like this. I have a development team. Okay. I have a team of developers who would like to gain access to one particular RG known as DevRG. Inside that DevRG, the developer should have what? A reader access. Secondly, I want resources like SQL Server, a web app. The name of the web app should start with dev or something like this. SQL Server should also start with dev because it's a dev RG. And I want the web app to do a read and write operation on the SQL database. Operation on the SQL database. So we have the code for that, right? Read and write operations and etc. So read and write, even if it's read, I'm okay with it. But I want the infrastructure creation to be dynamic. Meaning I want you all to maintain the state of the infrastructure in ARM templates and the life cycle of the infrastructure using Azure Devops CI/CD pipelines. Now the developer has a SQL script. He's giving you the SQL scripts and etc. I want you all to build the entire end-to-end CI/CD pipelines for this particular application. Meaning CI should do your ARM template copy, code building, and the release pipeline should do ARM template deployment. And while deploying the ARM template, using the Azure Key Vault to store your secrets. Post this, I need an Azure App Service deploy on a stage called dev, and in SQL Server, you need to execute the SQL commands. Now, one thing is that the entire requirement should have a definite life cycle, meaning you'll need to define what is the branching and merging strategy. You need to have a static code analyzer, meaning the developer wants to have a static code analyzer so that the code can be tested before feature branches merge. Now you need to integrate something known as a sonar into this, and you need to have branching policies. I need at least one person to review it before the code gets approved. This is the life cycle that I want to maintain, and if possible, I also want developers to go ahead and or basically whenever you do a change, I want that change to be associated with a work item. These are all something that you need to enforce using your branching policies. This is my requirement. This is an end-to-end project where I want you to work in the next 1 week. So we have discussed everything, guys. You have everything with you all. You need to now connect the dots on what to do and how to do, and I want you all to do it in a separate project. No, don't do it in the project that you're already in. Want you all to do in a separate project out here. Create a separate project, and now when you create in a separate project, please go ahead and add me into that project as a contributor. Add me into your organization, add me into your project as a contributor to see how you're doing it. Okay, so this is the
will you share your email address?
Yeah, I'll share my email address. This is the Outlook basically that I don't use a lot. So I'll share my email address. Please go ahead and add me to that particular project so that I can monitor it out. And this is the end-to-end requirement that I need. And here the developer has an idea of something like developer123@gmail.com. So you also need to set up the RBACs for this. Guys, is everyone clear with this requirement? What I'm asking, is it doable in the next 1 week? Now, this is exactly how in real time they're going to give you a requirement, guys. Very simple. They won't even go in this particular detail. Just like this is what I need. This is what you do. Whatever resources you need, I'll arrange it for you. Please go ahead and achieve this out. You're using ARM, PowerShell. I'm not concerned about it. Any technology that you're comfortable with, please go ahead and build things out. But make sure that everything is version controlled. Meaning using Azure DevOps, everything is properly controlled. Everything has a proper life cycle out here. Okay. This is our project 1 on an end-to-end cycle. Let's discuss on how to achieve this out. Now break this in bits and pieces. If I were you, I will break it in bits and pieces to understand what is my start, what is my end, how do I connect things out. Like, get a few diagrams out here, and basically see how you can achieve it out. So I use this particular diagram out here. Like, I basically do this a lot. If I want to build out something, I'll firstly have to kind of chart it down, right? That what is my life cycle, how my code is flowing and all. Do this and then implement it. That will make things easy. That's the reason I do not give this is the first step, that's the second step, and etc. I'm just giving you in very vague way. This is exactly how the requirement is going to be, in a very vague way. They'll just give you in a very vague way, and they'll ask you to kind of do this. Now you will have to basically figure it out on what is the first step that you're going to achieve, what is the second step that you're going to achieve, how is the security that what kind of a security will you implement in your project. This is how you do it. Okay, guys, any questions with this? So two things when we meet the next time. One is the interview. We're going to start with the mock interview. Two is understanding what is your approach, how the approach is, and we kind of going to discuss about it. Okay.
Executing the SQL commands means inserting the table, right?
Yes, inserting the table and etc. That's correct.
And at last work item, what was?
I don't know, Akila. You'll have to figure it out.
Okay.
I want work items to be associated whenever you make a commit. Your client is going to exactly tell you the same. Your client is exactly going to tell you the same. And if you ask him a cross question, he'll tell, I don't know what that is. Please figure it out. Like, I don't even know what technology this is. This is someone who's from my technical team gave me this and I'm giving to you. Now figure it out. So let's make a practice of inculcating it right now. If you are not sure about anything, let's Google it out. Even before you reach out to me, Google it out. Tell me, this is what I have researched on. This is what I understand. Let me know if my understanding is right or not. Okay.
Okay.
Any more on this one, guys? Okay, then Sanjay, just get ready for the interview. I'll, I have your resume already. I'll just go through it. I'll suggest if there are any improvements out there, and I'll suggest, just go through the topics out there. So the questions are going to be asked out of that particular topic. So I'll make sure to also keep a copy of this one out. So let me also save a copy of this so that I know what exactly that we need to, kind of ask and all that stuff. Let's see a new folder out here, and let's see mock interviews. Let's see 9 a.m. say mock 1. So guys, please don't hesitate to kind of volunteer for these ones, because it's going to help you at the end of the day. So please make sure, if any questions, please make sure to reach out. Please make sure to practice. We have like 1 week. We have a good amount of work basically on our hand in order to basically build out an entire project. If possible, team up and kind of work on this. I'm okay even with that. We have everything, like we have practiced everything what was there in the project. Please make sure to build everything together, meaning piece everything together into, let's say, a proper structure. Okay. Okay, so if there are no further questions, guys, then I'm going to close the session today. Have a great day and have a great weekend ahead, and we'll meet the next Saturday, and we'll discuss more on this. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Have a great day ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Thank you.